All right, we're live now. Hi, Dwyer.
All right.
My name is Marlissa Brigitte. I'm with South Coast Almanac. I'm here today with Dwyer Murphy. We have a walking book tour that we do about 4 times a year, and our next book is The Stolen Coast by Dwyer Murphy. And he can't be with us because he's out of state. And so he very kindly agreed to join us by video today to answer some questions and sort of get us all psyched up for the tour. I am thrilled to do, before I introduce you, I just want to say I'm thrilled to meet you and to be doing this book because I have such a connection with Onset myself. So I will just tell you that last summer, everybody on the beach was reading this book. And then the books were being circulated from house to house. But there were many copies. Like, it was so fun to see everybody at the beach reading the same book. And lots of friends we got a bit of notoriety. Onset did when the New York Times posted that big article on
I was expecting to get quite a bit of crap for that because while it was a very nice and generous review and I really appreciated it, I think it started out with something like, in the downtrodden village of Onset, Massachusetts. I didn't think it was portrayed quite so downtrodden, but
right.
No,
but we all loved it anyway. Like we were just like, because Onset it's funny. Well, let me just say there are a few people joining us now. Some people will watch it later, but you can ask questions. Just use the chat function in the YouTube. I can see the questions. I don't know if you can, Dwyer, but I will be checking from time to. You probably can't. I think it's just me. But if you have questions, just feel free to drop them in. I did have somebody who is signed up for the walk but couldn't be here today. I have a question from her, which actually. Gosh, I have so many questions. It's hard to decide where to start. But what I had thought, since you're not going to be with us, and because we often, when we do have the author with us on one of these walks, we ask them to read from the book a few times. So I thought, because you're not going to be with us on the day of, could you maybe pick a favorite passage and read it for us now?
Yeah, of course. I thought maybe I would, I should say also, thank you so much for having me and for doing this. This is a real treat. And obviously, Wareham and Onset are sort of the center of my imagination still. I haven't lived there in maybe 20 years or something, or maybe about 20 years. And yet I kind of wrote this book in sort of a moment of, not desperation, but it kind of all came out in one big blow, and wasn't anything I planned. And I just kind of sat down and needed to write something. My first book was coming out and I felt like I needed to have something else in the bank in case that didn't work out. And I wrote this and I just immediately started writing about Onset. And I'm still not exactly sure why, but a couple of years later, it seems to still be sort of the central preoccupation of my imagination, at least for right now. I have another book coming. The next book will take place in another sort of fictionalized, stylized version of a Wareham town, a different story. And it just seems like I keep working on these, and working on a TV project right now that we can talk about maybe a bit too. And that's also set in the same place. So it seems to just have my mind gripped right now. But I'll start with the first chapter because that is the first thing I wrote. And, books tend to change dramatically from what you first write to what actually gets published. And for whatever reason, I don't think this first chapter ever changed at all. It stuck. This is how it came out. It doesn't necessarily have the most to do with the plot even of the book, but it somehow just never changed. And so I think I have an outsized fondness for it. So I'll read a little bit from this. Tommy Carvalho was featherweight champion of the Police Athletic League when he was 15 years old. That might not sound like much of a title to you or me, but Tommy was a point of pride. He married young straight out of high school and developed an addiction to Vicodin that he managed to kick, possibly by reminding himself that for a span of time in his golden youth, there wasn't another boy on the south coast of Massachusetts who could knock him down. The marriage ended after a year. He still saw his ex-wife regularly, liked to cook her dinner once or twice a week without asking questions about how she spent the rest of her time or affections. We had never been very close growing up, but Tommy was part of my Thursday evening pickup basketball game. Most of the year we played at the Y, but in summer we went to the beach. It was 5-a-side, full court, and Tommy was an able, if slightly undersized wing who liked to run. He had a carelessness about him on the court that I always admired. Whenever I pulled a rebound, I looked for him streaking down the sidelines. In the time since he cleaned up, Tommy had taken over as the head of Parks and Recreation. He was the one who had suggested laying the new blacktop on the public beach court several years before, and whenever we wanted to play late, he carried a master key to turn on the lights. We would all throw in $1 or $2 afterward toward the electricity bill. It seemed to me he had settled into a nice, tranquil life, all things considered, and it surprised me that summer when he brought up the possibility of escape. At first, I took it for a joke, but after he kept finding ways of steering the conversation back in that direction, I decided probably there was more to it. You should take a vacation, I suggested. Go somewhere warm. Have a cocktail. I don't want a vacation, he said. We got beaches right here. Then go somewhere cold. Fly to Iceland. It's light out all night. I'm not some goddamn tourist, he said. That was the problem. When you got right down to it, Tommy had a lot of pride. Well, I said, tell me where you want to go. Somewhere they won't find me. Who's they? The question only made him upset. In addition to the pride, Tommy had a temper. We were sitting at a table outside Alphonse's cafe across the street from the playground. The court lights were still on, and they cast a strange, sidelong glow over Tommy's gaunt features. Look, I said, unless you've got a reason, there's no point in dwelling on it. It's not something you do for recreation. You got to have a plan and a hell of a motivation. I got one, he said. You wouldn't understand, but I got a motivation. I'll end there.
It's great. That actually, it's interesting because Tommy does, I mean, there's great characters in here, right? I wondered who your favorite one was. Is it and
everybody else's favorite character seems to be Tommy, so I should probably I should develop that affection for him myself. I do. He ended up kind of becoming like a strange moral compass for the book, and the way it's framed is the first and last chapters kind of are bookmarked by conversations with Tommy. So maybe he does, but I enjoy the type of fiction I tend to gravitate towards is very conversational stuff. I love Elmore Leonard novels, and they're always full of big characters who can sit around a table or a bar and enrapture everybody with a conversation and a story. And I think that a lot of the characters in here share that quality. Tommy is one of them, but I suppose the main character's father is just sort of based loosely or not so loosely, depending on what he'll admit, on my own father and our kind of rapport. So I think that I'd have to say that's my favorite character, and the character I enjoyed writing the most is the narrator's father, who's kind of this washed out ex-spy who's hanging around Wareham and Onset and put together this kind of smuggling network in the town. He sits in his garden and smokes hash and pontificates and tells stories about the old days spying, and generally seems to be a step ahead of our narrator at every turn. So I enjoy his conversation the most.
Yeah. I mean, I liked them. I think I liked Elena the most. And I mean,
Elena is just a version of my wife too, so she'll be happy she's around here at the house somewhere.
I was wondering. I was like, clearly he has a thing for Elena in real life, whoever this Elena is based on.
Yeah, we've been talking about casting a screen version of Elena, and I think my wife wants veto rights on whoever plays that, because it's very much just it's a version of her with a slightly different background. She's a human rights lawyer, she's from Venezuela, so she's not from Onset or the South Coast of Massachusetts, but I kind of took a lot of her qualities and attributes and our particular back and forth dynamic. A lot of the dialogue between the narrator and Elena sounds like it could be from like a screwball comedy or something from, like the Philadelphia Story, but with a crime going on around them. And I think that we tend to have a little of that combative conversational relationship.
And so that brings me to my big question of this is like, it's clearly like it's marketed and it is a diamond heist story, which is very easy to say. I say it and then people are like, "Oh, that sounds good," because who doesn't love a diamond heist, right? It's great. Right. It's a great thing, and it is about that. But I really think it's a love story.
No, absolutely, yeah, I completely agree, and I mean, So it is obviously a diamond heist story, and the heist is central to the story, but in large part, I think the kind of heist stories I like, mostly movies, because there aren't that many novels, at least modern novels, that use a heist. There's some great Colson Whitehead novels that he's done recently that have heist sequences, but otherwise it's mostly a movie thing. And to me, whoever is actually committing the heist, the best part is sort of the prep, getting the team together and then watching them plan the heist. And that tends to often play out almost like a courtship or a romance. And even if it's, can be George Clooney and Brad Pitt talking about how they're going to rob a casino in Vegas, but it still has this kind of sharp romantic quality to it for me. Yeah. And so I thought it would transpose easily if I let their love story play out in the midst of this heist, and kind of every step of the way along the path to stealing these diamonds is kind of part of this strange seduction and courtship that they're playing between the two of them. Right. So to me, it is a love story as well, and that's probably the part of it that I'm interested in the most. This idea of two people who kind of know that they're no good for one another, and that if they're doing something together, it's probably doomed, but it's also the most exciting thing in their lives, and they're drawn to it anyway.
Yeah, and then frankly, they don't understand one another at all. And they're always trying to figure out each other's motivations, like, what is he really doing? What are you really asking? She says that a number of times.
Yeah. And whenever they're talking, they're always talking slightly at cross purposes, or there's some dissonance between them, because they're never quite exactly talking about the same thing, which I think is part of the fun too of writing that kind of dialogue. Nothing is directly responsive. They're always each playing out their own kind of scheme as they're talking, or at least she is. I think often he's just trying to keep up, but she's always got a scheme.
Yeah. I mean, but so in the middle, I was reading it and writing notes in the side, and at some point I said, "This is the Casablanca of diamond heists."
That was part of the inspiration. Yeah, no, it is, absolutely. I love Casablanca. It's the movie that I could quote endlessly and have seen probably more than any other movie. And I love the idea of this sort of town at the edge of the continent where everybody has gathered and collected to sort of play out their own dreams and schemes, and that there are still these physical spaces like Rick, a cafe, where everybody, no matter what their cross purposes or rivalries might be, everybody goes to Rick's at night. And I love that idea. So for me, there's a few different spots that I kind of invented, or amalgamations of real places that became my version of Rick's, but a few cafes and restaurants and bars down along the harbor there that I kind of made into my version of Rick's, the idea of all these people assembling together.
You did a good job, because I really was like, in the same way that when you watch Casablanca, you're like, well, what do they really feel for each other? Who's playing who knows, and you never know. Like, it just, every time you watch it, you're like, I don't think anybody knows. I don't think they know.
Yeah, no, completely. I think, the Elena character probably thinks she knows the most, and probably does. I'm just thinking, as I spool out the inspiration behind my wife, she's usually a few steps ahead of me. But I think you're right. That everybody, that's the sort of suspense of this book. It's not necessarily will they or won't they steal the diamonds. In some respects, that could have been anything what they were stealing, but it's really watching these people try to figure one another out and not be able to do it. They kind of remain a mystery to one another throughout.
Well, and interestingly, the diamond heist occurs 2/3 of the way in, so you still have like a third of the book to go. So you realize it's really not about if you didn't know before.
Yeah, exactly. In my mind, when we were first kind of laying out the chronology of this doesn't give anything away for anybody who hasn't read it, but there were times, so it was going to be the span of a summer in this fictionalized Onset, and to be honest, as I was writing it, I would often forget about the diamond heist, that at some point they were going to have to steal these things and that something was going to happen, because I was writing towards the festival at the end of the summer, which in this book, I don't think we even give it a name, but it's kind of a combination of several different summer festivals that happen around Massachusetts. Primarily, it was I was thinking of the timing of the Cape Verdean Festival in Onset, usually I think that's early to mid August. And so I had it in my mind as the end point of this story, because after that, kind of the summer begins to wrap up kind of, and then we come into Labor Day. So I kept thinking about the structure of a summer and leading up to the festival and holiday weekends, and then oh yeah, they've got to steal some diamonds in here at some point too. That's going to have to happen. But in my mind, I just couldn't wait to get to the festival scenes and to write those scenes. I think is just what I was excited about. So I was writing towards the festival more than anything.
Yeah. And one of my questions was about the festival, because it seemed to me like a bunch of different ones. And so how, in general, when you were researching this, I mean, it wasn't research because you knew the place very well, but like, how did you research it? Do you know, like, did you come and immerse yourself and go to a bunch of festivals? Did you go to the Feast in New Bedford? Because it had a little bit of that to me.
Right. So, I mean, for the festival specifically, for Onset generally, the research I did do was years ago. I had gone into the library branch in Onset and got out a bunch of kind of archival books with the help of some of the librarians about the founding of Onset and sort of the history of Onset. And that was wonderful. And that was before I even had this book in my, this was probably a couple of years before I knew I was going to write the book. So I didn't know why I was researching Onset. I just knew that the landscape and the town and the culture appealed to me. So I wanted to know more about it. And I figured I would use it for something eventually, and did. For the festivals, it was just a combination of, so there are some very specific festivals, I guess I would say. So yes, the Feast in New Bedford, Fisherman's Feast in Gloucester, both of those lend some elements to the festival here. Primarily, I was thinking about the Cape Verdean Festival, but kind of a slightly bigger and even more music focused version of that, and combining that with the old, I'm not even sure if this exists anymore, but there used to be a scallop festival down by the railroad bridge. Right. And I have all these formative memories.
It still exists. But
it does? Okay, great. Maybe it's like, I want to say it's after. Is it during the summer?
That's in September, end of September, actually.
Yeah, I always remember it being like a brilliant September day when after the summer tourists had cleared out, but then they would set up those big tents over by the railroad bridge. And all of these festivals were ones I grew up going to, and some of them kind of left these very strong impressions that I then purposely didn't look into, because I didn't want to look back at the festivals and find out they were much smaller or different than I remembered. I kind of wanted to just let my own romantic nostalgia for all of these festivals take sway here. And so the tents, I suspect, are much bigger than what are actually used on like the Bluffs and Onset or something, or even at the Scallop Festival. But in my memory, I was always, a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old boy going around these massive tents that look like cathedrals, and there's just scallops and fried food everywhere and big bodies crashing into one another. So I allowed myself to exaggerate and stylize all of those memories into something that was kind of a big swirling wild bacchanal. And hopefully none of the festival organizers mind that I took little pieces of their festivals and combined them into one. But I'd like to think, someday we can build all this into a festival that size. Maybe I'll get to come back and help out in the tents, frying scallops. My mother was thrilled if I was working a scallop station in the tents.
So you mentioned the library, and I wanted to, a shout out to the library because they're co-sponsoring the walk with us. And we're starting at the Spinney, which is where you did your research, I assume, when so we're starting there. Also a shout out to the Wareham Cultural Council, who's helping to fund this as well. And these are all my sponsor things. It's part of Art Week South Coast. So if anybody's listening and doesn't know about Art Week South Coast, just go to artweeksouthcoast.com and check out. There's a lot of free and interactive art events in 10 days in May across the South Coast. So that'll be fun. But going back to the library, when you were very kind and sent some extra books for us, and I brought some of them to the library so that they could put them in circulation prior to the walk. And the librarian behind the desk said, I think your name is not the same name as your name. It's not, right? Like you have a pen name. And I had already figured that out because I could not find any trace of you except in connection with the 2 books. So I was like, already this guy is like Jack. the
I
one
know.
the one who's like finding new identities. But when I went up, she said, I think I know him. She said, I remember him coming to story hour, and it was Kathy, whose last name I don't remember actually. But she had a different name, because now I've kind of figured it out, because
Okay.
people have started to RSVP. And by the way, we have a lot. We have like 45 people
Oh,
RSVP.
that's so exciting.
Yes, and it's still like a long way away, so there will be more. But um, and what's really nice is that there's a group of teachers that your mom's friends are coming.
Uh,
So so you have a
yeah, so I
lot
mean,
of
my mom taught in the public schools in Wareham for forever, and that's where I went to school. And I lived at the libraries. The Wareham Free Library across from the schools was
yeah.
every afternoon. That's where I spent, and then the Spinney and Onset was another place that seems to keep working its way back into my fiction. So it seems like I can't get any of these places out of my mind, but I also owe them a huge debt. I mean, like uh, the libraries meant everything to me, because I was a kind of a bookish kid in Wareham growing up, who wanted to imagine what it might be like to be a writer and to do these things. That was kind of my dream from a young age. And I just devoured everything in the library. My parents were big devotees of the library and still are. And I can't say enough about them, and just the importance of a good library in a town. It opens up so many doors and horizons and landscapes to kids especially, but to everybody. So I'm delighted to think that this book is in the libraries now in Wareham. That's just really exciting to me. I got to go back and see them soon, I hope.
Yeah, yeah. So one question I had for you is, if you were designing this walking book tour, this is a cheap question for me, because it
No,
helps
this is
me.
good. I've been thinking about that. Yeah, I was gonna pull up the map, but because it's so hard to know that because I hope nobody minds. I like corrupted the geography of Onset freely. I never had like a map in front of me and thought, well,
Right,
this road connects to that road, so I need to do this or that. I really allowed myself some liberties with that. Hopefully
right.
nobody minds. But there
No,
were
I
all these
understand.
landmarks along the way that I used. I mean,
Hmm.
so much of almost all of the book is set basically within, a half square mile of downtown Onset there,
Hmm.
from say like the Stone Bridge to Shell Point is basically the extent of the world
Hmm.
of this
Hmm.
book. And there are
Yep.
scenes that kind of take place. I want to say Stonebridge certainly has some scenes that there. And then I kind of imagined.
Is the Stonebridge Mary Ann's, or is it?
So yeah, so in my mind, Marianne's is on that bluff that you have to descend going down to Stonebridge. There used to be a tiki lounge up there
Oh
years
yeah,
ago.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know if it's still there. And there was another version of a tiki lounge out on Cranberry Highway that I have a very like distinct
Oh
visual
yeah.
memory of, and I just planted that on top of the bluff going down into
Hmm.
Stonebridge, and that was
Hmm.
Marianne's Tiki Lounge, which is one of the kind of Rick's Cafe type bars that
Yeah.
all the characters seem to congregate around.
Hmm.
And then coming down into the village center from there, uh, if you're coming down that bluff onto the pier, there's a lot of scenes that are set on that pier. And is Kenny still there? I'm sorry, I'm just
No,
asking here. No.
Kenny's isn't. Well, Kenny's is now it's called Onset Beach Patio Grill or something. It's like you can
Okay.
get lunch and stuff, but Kenny's isn't sadly there.
Right. So there were scenes at Kenny's and on the pier, where the ferry is. I mean, I had a lot of strange memories of the Viking ferry. I imagined it as a bigger ferry, like a passenger ferry that would go out to Woods Hole, I think in New Bedford or something. But
Yeah.
there are all those scenes out at the end of the pier, and then all along the beach there, the characters are constantly walking up and
Hmm.
back and forth along that beach, and all of their houses are
Yeah.
sort of on a fictionalized version of Shore Drive, a
Hmm.
short walk away. And in this story, the idea is that this town has become a hub for people who want to escape and create a new identity. So people want to lay low for a little while and have this very particular service performed, which is like creating them a new identity. they come and stay in this version of Onset in cottages and motel rooms around the town, where they're kind of shuffled around by this father and son business who make them the new identities. But so all of the houses along Shore Drive, I was using and describing my memories of them, but also just I would take some photographs, or I would send my dad over there to take some photographs if I needed specific architectural details of something.
Mm-hmm.
They have the big handover of the kind of diamonds that comes later is down on Shell Point, and where they actually commit the crime, in my mind, is over on Wings Neck, sort of in Pocasset. So they kind of take a boat across the bay and then, retreat back to Onset to then get rid of the diamonds and enjoy the festival and all of that. So all of that downtown Onset is, I mean, to me, I know that I took all of these liberties, and yet I imagine the entire book and am now trying to imagine the TV show, all of it existing really in that very contained little half-mile span. So I hope it works for a walking tour, because
it's an easy one to put together because Onset's so compact and there's such lovely vistas from different places that we can stop and kind of talk. But let's talk about the TV show, because that's in part why you can't come in May, because you're going to be working on that.
So not to be now coy about it, there's only so much I'm allowed to say at the moment, but we are developing a TV show based off of this book, and my hope is that if we're able to make it, that we'll be back in Massachusetts and Onset to do so. I'm sure there are a lot of vagaries that I don't even know about of TV development along the way, but my time, most of my time these days, is consumed by working on that TV show. So it's been exciting to kind of imagine what Onset might look like on the screen, because it's such a physically beautiful town. I really do think village, but so I grew up in Shangri-La in Wareham, so that's like way out at the end of Glen Charlie and by the Kettle Ponds and the Cranberry Bogs. But Onset was sort of where we went. I don't know, it's like, to me, that was going out when you were a kid, because Onset is actually a walkable place. Like, how many villages are there like that anymore, where you can just park along the hill there above Mark Anthony's, and then you can go out to dinner and go walk along the beach and have an ice cream. Like, it is a very walkable place. You don't even really need a car if you're downtown there for anything. And so I just felt like it was this great contained space, and now I'm trying to imagine what it might look like on the screen. And it's gorgeous. It's such a beautiful it's a beautiful town, and I think it would film really nicely. So we'll hope that everybody else agrees and the production allows. But it's been exciting to kind of imagine what that might look like. And it means that I get to spend all my imaginative time all day long in Onset dreaming up what this could be.
Have you seen the movie The Way, Way Back, with Steve Carell?
Yeah, the Steve Carell movie. Yeah,
so there were snippets of Onset in there, and there was a scene in Mark Anthony's in there. So
I remember. Well, I worked at Waterwiz. That was one of my first jobs when I was, I think, 14. I first got my work card. I was trash boy for a summer at Onset, and my sister was one of the managers, and all of my friends worked there too. But I spent the summer walking around collecting trash, and then worked there for a couple more years. So The Way, Way Back was a big deal. And all of those places appear too. Don't take the walking tour out to Cranberry Highway. That doesn't.
No, we will not do that, of course.
I really, all of that stuff kind of, I just pretended like Cranberry Highway was much closer to Onset than it is, but I figured I would allow myself that as well.
Just like when you're thinking about the TV show, well, two questions. One is it kind of about this story? Like, is it a limited series about this particular story, or is it a series more like Spencer for Hire, where they have the main character who's just, like, it's not this particular story, it's him.
It's this particular story, but in a more open way that would be conducive to multiple seasons. It's not a limited story. So we kind of have had to open up the story a bit to figure out how it would continue. But the main arc is sort of Jack and Elena's arc from this book.
And who would you, if you had your druthers, if you could pick anyone in the world to play Jack and Elena, who would they be?
I would have to ask my wife that one. No, so I'll refer absurdly to like old and dead people, because that's safer. And we're meeting with live people, so I don't want to curry too much favor. But no, for Jack, I would have Robert Mitchum would be the actor that was sort of in my mind for it, and for Elena, in my mind, she's like probably, well, so in the book, I think we have her as like Azorian heritage, but a lot of what I was doing, as I said, was just like spinning off my wife. So she's like a Venezuelan Lauren Bacall or something like that. That's how I would cast it in my mind. That's those are but for some reason, that's the kind of movie my mind gravitates towards and the kind of dialogue I like to write. So I would like to see a Robert Mitchum and Lauren Bacall version of this. I think probably, but we'll hopefully find some.
Those are good. Those are good.
Great actors to do it instead.
We have
and then they all got to come though. We got to make sure that they get immersed and go to. I think Mark Anthony's is the first place we have to take everybody if we're going to do this project.
Yeah, for sure. So Jean just wrote in the comments, we go to the Mass Audubon property out at Great Neck. Beautiful view of bridges from there. Also found railroad tracks that go into the water. Maybe the tunnel to the Cape.
Wait, so now I have a question. Is the Audubon property out in Great Neck, that's what used to be Little Harbor Golf Course up there? Is that right?
No, it's where the seminary, like it's sort of at the end where the seminary, like across from the seminary, but I think the seminary was perhaps sold to I think that might be part of like they had created this property, and then I think they might have taken in the seminary as well. So
I remember hearing that the golf course still around, or is that gone now?
Yeah, but it's owned by Wareham now, so it's still operating. But now just recently, so it might have been last year, it was bought by the town. So
I get dates of it.
So I don't.
While we would hang out.
Yeah.
My friend Derek Vecino and my friend Danny Alexander were both Danny worked at Little Harbor Golf Course, and then Derek lived out in Little Harbor. So I also kind of just literally used some of the names of those neighborhoods in the areas of Little Harbor to borrow from some.
It's a lovely nod to the area. Like it was thrilling to read and to see the place. And I'm going to ask Connie. Connie Hilton is one of our frequent, she comes to a lot of the walking book tours, but she couldn't be here today. But her question was, is Onset really like that? She's from Fairhaven, or she just recently moved to Fairhaven. So is Onset really like that? And first I thought, because I sent out an email saying, hey, we're doing this thing. If I sent it out to people who are signed up. If you want to join us, we'll be there Thursday morning. If you have any questions, send them along. So Connie writes this question. So first I thought it was to me. So I started to answer it. It's like, oh, no, that question is for Dwyer.
Okay, I'll say that's a complicated answer. A couple of real kernels were kind of spun out into this version of an Onset. So I used to work summers in the DA's office, the Plymouth County DA, but like the Wareham office that's out in West Wareham. Yeah. And when I was there, somebody had told me, I don't know if it was, or I didn't know if it was apocryphal or real, that Wareham had a large reputation as a place where you would often find fugitives, not like, we're not talking about America's Most Wanted, but sort of people who needed to hide out or lay low for a little while. Wareham had a reputation as a place in this part of the Northeast where a lot of people would go for many reasons. Some of them had to do with the sort of the motels that were out on the highway out there, or cottages in the off season, informal networks of moving people around. But this obviously wasn't an organized system. This was just kind of an historical accident that had happened. I kind of hung on to that piece of information for decades, and then later decided to invent something bigger, and was a little worried that I had maybe just completely misremembered that fact. And then I was very fortunate to run into some former law enforcement along the way of the book tour when the book came out. And several people confirmed for me that was indeed the reputation of Wareham at one time, that it was a place that, nothing nefarious or organized about it, just a place where people could live anonymously if they needed to for whatever reason. And it was somewhere where people went to look for people who were living anonymously if they were in search of them. I kind of took that out, and my father, he was consistently embarrassed whenever I mention any of this, but has allowed me to like talk about it fleetingly, is sort of a washed out spy who lived his life as a bookstore manager, but had roughly the same background that Jack's father has in this story. And I allowed myself to imagine, what if my father were actually running the network of fugitives and Wareham, and that it was all very deliberate, and he was bringing them here in order to change their identities and shuttle them off to the next stop across the border. And I took that sort of a couple of pieces of little historical apocrypha and imagined them into a world. So I would say this is my romantic stylized version of Onset, but I also do think that some of the things that make, I think, this fictional version of Onset a fun place to spend time are real. The sort of the sense of community and this closed in space, and the dedication to the kind of the food and music of the Portuguese and Cape Verdean diaspora, and a lot of people pushed into this beachy neighborhood that it always feels, when you're walking around the streets in Onset, it always feels to me like a small city has just been dropped into this beautiful little beach pocket. And that means that there's life out on the corners, and people are sitting out on the stoops the way they do in Brooklyn, and hanging out in their yards in the evening, and populating the beaches and hanging around the green spaces. And there's a liveliness to it, and an electricity to it, that maybe just because it was the liveliest place I had ever been when I was, 16 years old, and getting to walk around Onset at night that was a big night out. And it still works for me. It still gives me that same electricity. Whenever I go home, we always drive right down to Onset and go to Mark Anthony's and then walk around, and it fills me with that same excitement today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like that. I think my answer is somewhat similar. I guess it's there's a draw to the place. And so if you've grown up there, particularly, I think, I grew up in the summers, so I was one of the summer people, but my grandparents had a house. My mom was a teacher. My aunt was a teacher. My cousins and I lived down there for the summer. And I think when you're somewhere for a whole summer, that's kind of where you feel like you're grown up. And when I lived I lived in New York and DC, and when I was in DC, I was like, I got to move back to Massachusetts, because I can't go to Onset just 1 week a year. And I tell people, like, part of my soul is there. And so I guess that's what I felt from this book, because Jack is running this whole operation trying to make people run from their lives, but he's so deeply rooted. And what comes, he's so I don't know if in love with Onset, but Onset's definitely a character in this book.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that, part of the story is his love affair and relationship with Onset, and whether he's going to leave it or stay with it, and what that is a big part of the story. And so I think I got to pour all of my own romanticism into that.
So I would say,
where in Onset was your family? Were you guys?
Point Independence, so just on the other side of the Stone Bridge.
Right.
But I would say, when I was thinking about her question, I was like, the difference is my street. People have been there for years and years and years, and no one has any secrets. Everybody's just, we've been neighbors for years, and people and everybody's outside all the time. You're out on your porch.
Right.
People are walking by talking. So my answer was, it's less secretive than the world that you portray.
Definitely less secretive. Yeah. But it has that, I think, like you said, just the fact of people walking around makes it feel like a community and accessible in a way that a lot of places don't have. Everybody is just sort of driving out to remote houses and driving back and forth to the highway. This feels very much like a place where people put their car in the driveway and then leave it for weeks on end, and they're walking around, and that makes it feel alive in a different way, I think.
Yeah. We have another comment from somebody who says she just finished the book last week. Now I want to visit Onset. So we love that when people want to visit Onset. so join us for the walking tour. It's May 11th, Saturday afternoon from 2 to 4.
Where is it going to start? What are you thinking?
It's going to start at the Spinney.
Okay, great.
And then I roughly have been thinking about, going down to Shell Point through the neighborhood and then coming around and maybe going as far as the Stone Bridge. I have to figure out how many, we try to keep them between 1 and 2 miles. And I think that works. Yeah. And I was trying to think whether we would go to the Wigwam, because there's sort of the whole spiritualist, the history. Let's just talk about the history.
Save that for the next book, because the next book will delve into that. The next book is kind of a gothic.
I am so happy you're still in Wareham Onset for the next book, because I read An Honest Living after reading this, and I loved An Honest Living, but and you did the same thing with Brooklyn that you did with Onset here. And so then now this is Onset, and I was like, one of my questions was going to be, are you going to keep moving so that you can keep doing different books that use the neighborhood as a main character?
I wanted to say, because it seemed to me that there was, so the sort of spiritualist history of Onset and the area is fleetingly mentioned in this book, and then I don't think it doesn't factor into it too much, and so it felt, but it's a history that I'm extremely interested in and wanted to use in the same way I'd use some of the history for this book. So the next one, which I think it'll come out next summer, not this coming summer, but next summer probably. Okay. That is largely based around the sort of the legacy of spiritualism in a fictionalized Onset that I think we're calling Patuxet this time, or something like that. We've got a fictional name for it just to distinguish it from the Stolen Coast. But if you want to save the campground, you can save it for it for the next.
We'll do that. Well, I know you have a lot of work to do, and I can talk to you all day, but you have to go write some scripts. So thanks for everybody who's going to view this afterwards. Thanks to the library for being part of this. Thanks to Wareham Cultural Council. Thanks to you, Dwyer, for writing this book and letting us talk about Onset. It's our first walking book tour in Onset, even though I have such a strong connection to Onset. So that's amazing to me that we haven't done it yet. But we were waiting for the right book.
Thank you so much for organizing this. This is really it really is a thrill for me, and thank you to everybody in Wareham for reading the book.
I also want to say that so I was going back to when I was trying to reach out to you to find out whether we could do this, whether you would be ever around. I knew you lived in Florida, but I was having trouble finding you, and I can Google as well as the next person, and I'm like, this is not his real name, because it's only
my name is Joe, so that's probably why that's the confusion. My middle name is Dwyer.
So then then we connected, and then we have to do it in May because we wanted it to be part of Art Week, but and you couldn't be in Massachusetts then, and you said, but I'll send some emissaries. And I was like, oh my God, even that sounds very noirish.
Yes. Well, my father is a washed out spy, so if you see any shady guys looking,
he has signed up, so I can't wait to meet him. I'm always meeting people.
I didn't know if he had. Well, I'll try to send some more emissaries too, but no, if there's any confusion over that, I'm not trying to be PG about it. I'm Joe Murphy from Wareham High, class of 2000.
Oh, I kind of keep the mystery.
I think we were something like that. Yeah, so that's me. My parents are Jack and Kathy. Everybody will remember my mom probably was a teacher. So my mom taught like the health and sex classes at school in Wareham, which is always an anecdote I've gotten a lot of mileage out of, that my mom taught everybody. My mom gave everybody in Wareham the sex talk at some point or another, probably.
Did you get to? Were you excused from that day of class, or did you?
I was. I was excused. I don't know if anybody else remembers this, but they just decided it was too mortifying for me to have to sit in the class while everybody I knew got the sex talk from my mom. So they sent me down to the gym to shoot free throws, which I think is just a bizarre and really nice. I still to this day use shooting free throws as a form of meditation. And I think that's probably where it began, was just trying to put this humiliation out of my mind. Just shooting free throws while 500 kids got the sex talk from my mom.
That's great.
Yeah, but no,
thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you for doing this. Thank you for organizing it, and thank you to everybody for reading it, and thank you to Wareham for existing, and Onset, and Wareham for allowing me to borrow a little of the geography and the story of the town for this. But I hope everybody enjoys it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great book. Everybody should read it, even if you can't come on the walking book tour. And then you should visit Onset.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll get the tourism.
All right. Thanks for joining, everybody. We'll see you in May. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.